Ed Gein's House of Horrors, the infamous butcher of Plainfield, used human remains to craft household items like lampshades, bowls, and a suit made of skin, inspiring films like Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Toy Box Killer, David Parker. Ray allegedly tortured and killed dozens of women in a custom-built torture chamber, though he was convicted of only 3 kidnappings due to a lack of physical evidence for murders. Albert Fish's letter. The gray man confessed to cannibalizing a child in a chilling letter sent to the victim's family, describing the act in horrific detail. Catherine Knight's gruesome act. In Australia, Catherine Knight murdered her partner, skinned him, and cooked parts of his body with plans to serve it to his children. The Cleveland torso murderer. This unidentified serial killer in the 1930s dismembered at least 12 victims, leaving body parts scattered across Cleveland. Jeffrey Dahmer's trophies. The Milwaukee cannibal kept skulls, body parts, and a vat of acid in his apartment, intending to create a shrine from his victims. Jack the Ripper's letters. The Ripper taunted police with letters, one of which allegedly contained part of a victim's kidney. His identity remains a mystery. The Toolbox Killers. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris recorded their torturous murders of teenage girls, with tapes revealing harrowing details of their crimes. The Axeman of New Orleans. This unidentified serial killer from the early 1900s attacked victims in their homes, claiming in a letter he would spare households playing jazz music. The Chicago Rippers, a satanic cult led by Robin Gecht, was responsible for mutilating and murdering women in the 1980s using horrifying rituals. The Candyman killer, Dean Corll, with the help of teenage accomplices, abducted, tortured, and murdered at least 28 boys in Texas during the 1970s. Hinterkaifeck murders. In 1922, an entire family in rural Germany was murdered with a mattock. Strange footprints in the snow hinted at the killer's presence before the crime, but it remains unsolved. Issei Sagawa's freedom. A Japanese student studying in Paris killed and ate his classmate René Hardevelt in 1981. Declared unfit for trial, he was sent to Japan, where he was released and lived as a free man. The Killer Clown. John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men and boys, burying most of them under his house. He performed at children's parties dressed as Pogo the Clown. The Zodiac Killer's cipher. The Zodiac sent cryptic messages to newspapers in the 1960s, taunting authorities. Some of his ciphers remain unsolved to this day, keeping his identity a mystery. The death of Junko Furuta. In 1988, a Japanese teenager was held captive for 44 days, enduring unspeakable torture by her captors before succumbing to her injuries. The Vampire of Dusseldorf. Peter Curtin confessed to drinking the blood of some of his victims, earning his vampiric nickname. His execution in 1931 marked the end of a reign of terror in Germany. The Murder Castle. H.H. Holmes built a hotel in Chicago during the 1893 World's Fair designed with trapdoors, gas chambers, and secret passages to kill his victims. The Yorkshire Ripper. Peter Sutcliffe murdered 13 women in the 1970s in England. Police failed to apprehend him earlier due to dismissing potential victims as less credible. The Moors murders. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley killed 5 children in the 1960s, burying their bodies on Saddleworth Moor. Recordings of their crimes revealed chilling details of their brutality. The Villisca Axe murders. In 1912, 8 people, including 6 children, were bludgeoned to death in their home in Iowa. The crime remains unsolved, and the house is now said to be haunted. The Chicago Tylenol murders. In 1982, 7 people died after taking cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules, leading to widespread panic and the development of tamper-proof packaging. The killer was never caught. Andrei Chikatilo's crimes. Known as the Butcher of Rostov, this Soviet serial killer murdered at least 52 people, often mutilating his victims and leaving them in forests or rivers. The disappearance of the Sodder children. In 1945, 5 children vanished from their home in West Virginia after a mysterious fire. No remains were found, and there were claims that the children were kidnapped before the fire started. The murder of Sylvia Likens. In 1965, Sylvia, a 16-year-old girl, was tortured for months by her guardians and local children. She was beaten, burned, and eventually died from the abuse. Her last moments were described as harrowing, and her torturers were sentenced to varying degrees of punishment. The Ketty Cabin Murders. In 1981, 4 people were found murdered in a cabin in Ketty, California. The victims were brutally stabbed, and one of the bodies had been mutilated post-mortem. The case remains unsolved. The case of the Black Widow, Nanny Doss. Nanny Doss murdered at least 11 people, including her family members, over several decades. She lured her victims with promises of love and marriage, then poisoned them. The Beast of Ukraine, Anatoly Onoprienko, a Ukrainian serial killer, murdered 52 people over several years. His method was brutal. He would shoot entire families and sometimes set their houses on fire to destroy evidence. The murder of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short's body was found severed in 2 at the waist, drained of blood, and horribly mutilated in 1947. Her killer's identity remains one of the most infamous mysteries in true crime. The murder of Grace Millane. In 2018, 22-year-old British backpacker Grace Millane was murdered by a man she met on a dating app in New Zealand. He strangled her to death, took intimate photos of her body, and then disposed of her in a suitcase. The cannibal killer Armin Meiwes. In 2001, Armin Meiwes killed, mutilated, and ate a willing victim, Bernd Jürgen Brandes, after they both agreed to the act. The crime was premeditated, and Meiwes filmed parts of it. Slaughter of the McDonald family. The youngest victim, 2-year-old Kristen, was stabbed 33 times, many of the wounds being inflicted on her face and neck. Her injuries were so severe that they suggested a brutal, deliberate attack, making her death one of the most shocking and horrifying aspects of the case. The Butcher of Hanover. Harmon lured his victims, often homeless boys or runaways, by offering them food, shelter, or work. Once in his home, he would overpower them and kill them by biting into their throats, a method he chillingly referred to as his love bite. The Lady of the Dunes. In 1974, the body of a woman was found on a beach in Massachusetts, severely beaten and decapitated. Despite extensive efforts to identify her, she remained a mystery until 2022.